Hello, hello. Welcome. My name is Dr. Wanda Toro Tarini here. I am your host and the producer of the Rocket Fuel podcast and host of Rocket Fuel events. Our mission is to connect you with experts that do excellent, amazing work in accelerating people's lives and people's businesses into their next level. So this particular topic is totally in our lane because we're talking about accelerating high performance employees, team members in I think basically if you are a leader and you're managing people that are customer facing and you already have excellence within your organization, we're going to talk about how to actually systematize that excellence so you can optimize results across your entire team or organization. So this is super exciting. Yay! Well, I want to welcome Dr. Gary David. Yep, a corporate consultant and a professor of sociology and experience design. And Dr. David, can I call you Gary?
Can I call you Wanda? You're a doctor too.
Absolutely.
We'll
Absolutely.
trade off on informalities.
Well, Gary, I am going to read this intro that is going to help people understand why you are the man to talk about this. All right. So Dr. Gary David, he is on a mission to help companies elevate the performance of their teams by actually tapping into the gold mine of excellence that is already within your organization. Okay. I love that. My experience in corporate, I'm already like tingling with excitement to talk about this topic. Now, how Gary does this is through his proven high performance framework methodology, right? Which results in higher sales, better customer experience, improved employee retention, and ultimately a better overall company culture, which is super important. Now, Gary is a professor of sociology and experience design. So I'm going to ask you more about what experience design is. A certified clinical sociologist and a consultant who helps people understand the human and social aspects of experience design. He is one of the co-founders of the Experience by Design podcast. And in 2 years, Experience by Design has become a leading forum for all of these thought leaders that are in this experience design profession. He's also known as Professor EXP on Twitch. That's why he has all like the fancy lighting and
Gotta have
everything.
all about the RGB.
Exactly. Where he live streams educational and analytical content 3 times a week. All right. So he is the expert in experience design. And you may not consider, how is high performance and performance management of a team, how does that link to experience design? So let's start off with this concept of experience design and sociology and such. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can tell you a lot about it, but I'll try to keep it short. If you ask a professor to explain something, you never know what you're going to get, but we'll try to keep it brief. So when we think about experience design, there's a few schools of thought. First off, it's not just one singular field, but it's concerned with the types of experiences that people have in whatever environment they find themselves in terms of the expectations they have going in, the interactions they have with that environment or with a product, good, or service of a company or a community. Also, the perception that's formed after that interaction, the memories that are formed about the experience that they had, and then also how do we measure to see what kind of experience they had, and how belonging and connection can elevate experience. And as human beings and as a sociologist, I study this. It's really the science of belonging and connection. And
Mm,
so the way I approach experience design is that I'm really focused on how to make connected experiences in which people can develop a sense of belonging, of collaboration, and a sense of, and hopefully in many cases, a sense of shared identity.
So it's fascinating to me, though it all makes sense. But when did experience design actually become a thing that people focus on and recognizing that understanding all of this, that you can actually proactively impact not only the experience that your employees have, the experience that your customers have, and actually um, just putting a focused awareness around it. It all makes sense, but this concept and this term of experience design was something that was fairly new for me.
I mean, the idea of experience and experiencing things.
I apologize. I want to clarify to our attendees that you're a professor at a business school.
Yes, well, of course.
Right. So that experience design, your focus is to help folks within the business arena to understand what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we think about the domain of experience, right, the study of experience, it only goes back about 3,000 plus years. The
Fairly.
ancient Greeks. Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a literature that one has to kind of wade through in order to get up to present day. From the ancient Greeks, ancient philosophers, are we having individual experiences? How do we know that they're shared experiences? People might be familiar with the allegory of the cave that was talked about by Plato. And so, kind of fast forwarding to today, experience design as a profession really started to emerge around user experience, for instance, as the first area that was talking about it. Don Norman, the Norman Nielsen Associates, we're talking about user experience. How do people experience products, goods, and technologies that we're designing for them to make them more usable? And then we start to see customer experience emerge as a field. About maybe 15 years ago, people start worrying about, well, what's the customer's experience? Then we start to think about patient experience. And then we start to think about employee experience. We think about student experience, on and on and on. It's the era that I call the Mad Libs era of experience design, where it's just take a noun, put it in before the word experience, and you have a new consulting area. So everybody, not everybody, but most companies are now thinking about experience not just as something they need to monitor, but as a strategic advantage in terms of what they're designing. And in fact, Pine and Gilmore wrote the famous book, The Experience Economy, where they talked about companies are no longer going to be competing on services or goods, but they're going to be competing on experiences. And not just competing for customers, but also competing for employees.
Yes. Okay. So my experience around experience design was typically around the user interface of
Right.
a website, of an app,
Exactly.
etc. Right.
Yep.
And so it was fascinating to me that it was a discipline in this area, in the sense that somebody actually specializes this and
Right.
focuses on it. Right. So let's now get into the employee experience,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
And for those of you that are attending, yes, I did promise you a workshop. So I know that, yes, I am a podcast host, so I love this conversational kind of approach to education. But Gary has a lot of great content to share with us, and so let's get back on that topic of
Mhm.
accelerating high performance, right? So
Right.
if we talk about the high performance kind of infrastructure, when I think back at my corporate days in pharmaceuticals and in marketing and in sales and basically any of these arenas where we're customer facing,
Right.
and we have we're thinking about the customer's experience with us, but then we're kind of highly competitive within
Mm.
our own environment. And when they taught us about excellence, there was really a lot of discussion around best practices. What
Mhm.
were the best companies doing, and how we as an organization should adopt those best practices. So I wanted your perspective on this concept of best practices, and how it affects employee performance.
I'm kind of like rubbing my hands together here because I'm like, oh, good, to get to talk about best practices now. It's not a clean thing here in terms of good or bad, right? I mean, best practices in terms of industry related best practices can be useful as a guide to thinking about what are we doing as an organization and what should we be doing as an organization. However, the problem starts when we start to implement best practices that are not suited for our organization.
Mm.
When sometimes best practices can be what I would call a least common denominator solution. It's like it fits everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. like maybe a piece of furniture from IKEA, right? I mean, like you can put it in any room, but does it really do anything for the room? I mean, it's functional, it's nice, besides the putting together part, but at the same time, does it have the character I'm looking for to fit the aesthetic I'm trying to create? So when we think about best practices, we're really talking about maybe using it as a starting point in a conversation, but not as an ending point of where we're trying to get to. And also, it can interfere, and this is like the really important part in terms of accelerating high performance, it can interfere with what we're already doing well. If you're coming to my organization, if you're coming to my classroom, and you're telling me this is how you should be teaching, and you haven't taken the time to even look at what I'm doing well already, then I feel like you don't value me as a contributor and as a performer.
It's this concept of keeping up with the Joneses, right? So you're focused on what it is that they're doing, but you're not really reflecting on kind of optimizing your own strengths and such. And I'm going to share some content also
Yeah.
that you shared with us.
Absolutely. We have a quote that I came across in looking at the literature, and there is a growing literature that is, I won't say anti-best practice, but provides a bit of a caution around becoming too reliant on best practices. You know, and the quote says, "I'm not saying you shouldn't take inspiration from companies that are achieving great success or advice from analysts who are in a unique position to observe and synthesize practices and trends across multiple companies and industries, but you must also reconcile what you learn with the situation you face." And I think this idea of what do we do well already? What is our unique situation? What is the culture we're trying to create? Who are our unique contributors? And how can we best leverage what we have versus trying to focus on what we don't have? Focus on what we're doing versus focusing on what we're not doing. And people might be surprised that I'm trying to be like an optimist, but I think it's always a good idea to start with strengths, start with what you do well, move from there, and then you can start to see what gaps you need to fill in.
So it's that internal reflection, and it's interesting that concept just popped into my head, like keeping up with the Joneses, right? So
Right.
when you're focused on keeping up with the Joneses, you completely lose sense of what assets, what beauty is within your own home, your own family,
Right.
your own organization, your own team, right? You're not worried about that, and so there's a loss of recognition of what's already
Right.
really good.
Exactly.
And I remember when we talked about preparing for this, you talked about this gap in recognizing the assets of that exist in your team already.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you can think about it in any domain you're in. We talked about sales, we talked about customer facing operations. I can apply the same thing to healthcare. I can apply it to education. I can apply it to governmental services. Really, in any domain, there's not much time spent on thinking about who are the best performers or recognizing who are performing well to begin with. One of the jokes that I tell people is if you call people managers, they will. And part of the problem then becomes management can be about controlling versus about recognizing. And so we have this idea of a reserved for employee of the month. Earlier in my life, I kind of looked askance at these ideas of employee recognition. You walk into a McDonald's and you see employee of the month there, you see employee of the week. I'm like, oh, does that really matter? Well, yes, it turns out it really matters. And that there's been a lot of research showing that people do appreciate being recognized for their contributions. And in some ways, it's even more important than increased compensation, that people feel valued as contributors. And so we have here this text is widely recognized and established in academic literature that employee recognition programs are vital to maintaining an engaged and committed workforce. And while these programs alone might not be enough, it doesn't mean that you can't pay your people well or can't provide them with the things they need to succeed. The absence of these programs can be enough to create a disconnection between employees and the organization. So there are some table stakes that as employers, we have to provide for our people: living wage, safe work environment, other kinds of supportive services to allow them to be excellent in their roles. But beyond that, we also need to think about recognizing what people are doing well and what they're contributing, even beyond the measurements that we think matter, and to really
Mm.
look at their work so that we understand what their contributions are and what they mean.
Gary, I'm really reflecting on a lot of things. I think sometimes when we're responsible for pretty aggressive goals, or I don't know, we're just keeping our eye ahead of us on the carrot, right? And not
Right,
like in this team experience. And and we kind of think of it as like extra, like
right,
a little fluffy or whatever. It's like we
right,
need to get things done. I'll think about that later.
right,
And I'll be vulnerable here in the sense that I'm just really reflecting on losing very great team members when their acknowledgement, like my accidental acknowledgement of them being excellent, was that they were helping the people that were not excellent kind of just scoot by, right?
right,
And they wound up getting frustrated that so and so was not performing, and what was their award, right? Their acknowledgement was that they were just put with the person that wasn't doing well, and helping them along. And it was a big lesson. The time I lost my first amazing, and it still hurts me to this day. But luckily we had a very, very good and open conversation, because that was important to me to understand why she was so valued, but
right,
she didn't feel valued with how I chose to acknowledge her,
right,
which was just to be like, "Hey, yeah, if you need help, go to so and so," and
right,
that wasn't the right way. So it winds up being, it could be extremely damaging to your business, to your team productivity, to lose those people that have so much to give. And this topic of systematizing excellence and mining the excellence from somebody like her, right? And
hmm,
being able to share and even potentially provide them some opportunity for empowerment and acknowledgement in that way could have been a game changer,
right.
you
And we have to
know.
we have to think about, are we putting our people in the best position to succeed? And when I say our people, that could be my students, it
Mhm.
could be healthcare providers, it could be call center employees, it could be our middle managers. Are we putting our managers in the best position to succeed? And there's a lot of pieces to that. And one of the things to think about is, how are people being successful already? And are they successful because of the environment and because of the resources and because of the infrastructure we're providing them? Or are they being successful in spite of our efforts?
Mm.
You know,
That might be an opportunity even for an attendee to just stop right now and take note of
right.
um take note of that. What's your initial your gut reaction to that question, right? Do you feel that your team is successful because of the infrastructure, because of support that the organization has provided, or is it in spite of that? It's kind of that feeling of like, oh, I'm lucky that I have so and so on the
Right.
team. If
Right.
you start saying, oh, I'm lucky I have so and so on the team, that doesn't mean that you're being purposeful in attracting and in keeping that excellence, huh?
Yeah. And I think it's important in most cases. There's a case I want to talk about where this wasn't true, but in most cases, when people are having a hard time succeed, or if they're succeeding in spite of the organization, it's not because people are being intentionally malicious. It's not because the organization is necessarily out to get them or that their manager is out to get them. It's because there's organizational inertia to change, to allow for the creation of an environment which is more supportive, because people are busy. It's hard to achieve change in the middle of your day,
Yeah.
because so much else is going on that maintains that inertia that prevents change from taking place. So most instances, rather than, this is not a conversation to make anybody feel bad, But there are some instances where people should actually feel kind of bad. There was a story I was looking at, which was quite remarkable regarding Amazon,
Mm.
where Amazon having to meet some metrics around referring people to the basically an enrichment program, a professional development program to up their skills. And here we have the article: ex-Amazon managers say they were pressured to cut successful workers to meet attrition goals and face retribution when they resisted. And I highlighted what I think is like a key takeaway here. These people said leadership would place employees in focus. This is this retraining program, even if the managers of those employees said that the workers had met or exceeded expectations.
Huh.
Yeah, this is like a head scratcher, right? And I did not go to Amazon for comment for this. I was just looking at this article from Business Insider, but it does give us pause, right? Are we servicing the metrics for the purpose of merely servicing those metrics, or are we reconsidering, rethinking what these metrics actually represent in the first place? And that's number one. Number two is obviously you need to be mining your highest performers for their excellence, not putting them in retraining programs because you need to meet a certain kind of number in your metrics. You know what I mean? And I feel kind of funny saying that, but apparently sometimes it needs to be said. One of the quotes I tell my students all the time is, how work gets done is the best kept secret in America. It's not my quote, it's from a sociologist, but it goes to, even for managers, they might know who are their best employees, but they don't know why they're their best employees. They don't know what they're doing that makes them their best employees. And as a result, so much competence is lost that organizations, I don't know what number to put on it, but you can imagine the amount of productivity, the amount of growth, the amount of innovation, ingenuity is lost because we fail to understand and capitalize on what makes us great already.
And the concept of saying, "Oh yeah, well, just, why don't you schedule lunch with Jane?" And I mean, she's really great at that, and maybe she can give you some tips. It's like you have to be a resourceful person on your own in order to potentially glean that excellence, when if the organization recognized that they could systematize that and everybody could benefit from it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go
it's
ahead.
frustrating because you kind of feel, I don't know how else to say, you feel dumb not addressing it. But
I prefer to think about it as busy. And again, the people who aren't in a position to support this high performance and understand this high performance haven't been tasked with the resources to get at this high performance. So they're left with systems that may not work for their employees. And this is especially true as business changes, as society changes, as products change, that we need to change with that. Our systems that support our organizations and our employees need to change. One of the things I think about is a football analogy. I also teach sociology of sports, and here in New England, we've undergone a little bit of a transition in the fortunes of our football team, the New England Patriots.
I know the pain.
Well, it's interesting, right? So if you listen to sports radio, which I do, you hear conversations around, is the head coach and the general manager, Bill Belichick, is he out of step with the changes that are taking place in the game? Is he not keeping up with what the game is today? Is he stuck in a past era of what worked before? Number one. Number two, you can't put a system in terms of an offensive scheme that doesn't support the talent you have. So on one side, we have Mac Jones, who is not the most mobile person in the world when it comes to quarterbacking. And on the right, we have Patrick Mahomes, which is very mobile and very creative in his play development. If you put Mac Jones in a scrambling, innovative kind of system, you're going to have a hard time. If you try to keep Patrick Mahomes in as a pocket passer and don't let him innovate and create as he sees things developing on the field, you're going to have a hard time. So the good coach or the good manager, the good offensive coordinator, is going to have a system, not only a system that he wants to see, but a system that fits the personnel. And
Mhm.
when and we saw this last year with the New England Patriots, we had a system that really didn't make sense for the talent on the field, if you could call it a system at all. And we had a season that was pretty underwhelming, and there was a lot of finger pointing versus looking at the Kansas City Chiefs, which of course had a very different kind of season. And so it's about putting people in the best position to succeed. And that starts with understanding what they already do well. We could spend a lot of time and effort trying to make Mac Jones into a scrambling, innovative quarterback, and he might get better at it. But does that make the most sense in terms of utilizing our resources? Wouldn't it be better to try to create a system that supports what he already does well? And in order to do that, you first have to know what he already does well. You have to know what makes him good at his job.
Right, right. And there has to be a structured effort
Mm,
in doing that, in focusing on that. So what's the fastest way? Like, how is it that somebody can start incorporating this into their organization? Because there's the busy factor,
right,
right? So now, I mean, I'm a manager, I'm listening to you, and I'm like, oh, I can't change culture and
right,
this and that. It feels like a lot. And it does feel like it's important to probably have some level of advocate
right,
around experience design, and or high performance experience, or whatever that is, like somebody that's watching that, so that you can kind of observe. Because when I think of my experience in pharmaceutical sales, um, I thought of how I try to extract um, the excellence and experience from the
right,
folks that were already the high performers, right?
right,
But we're inherently in competition with
right,
ourselves, so it's tough because the KPIs, those metrics really don't support the mining and the sharing of excellence, because we're being pitted against ourselves. So,
right.
how do you handle that? Like, what would be what are some of the approaches to starting to get this thought process and this approach considered?
There's a really great book called Turn the Ship Around by, I believe the author is David, blanking on his last name. It might
Mm,
come to me, but Turn the Ship Around is the name of the book. And the book is about, he took over a Navy submarine that was the lowest performing submarine in the submarine fleet,
mm,
and he had to turn it around. And one of the metrics that they would use for success was how many people from the submarine passed exams to achieve a higher level of certification or rank, and also how many were able to leave the ship to go to other posts that were higher level posts in other ships in the Navy. And usually we treat attrition as a bad thing, right? If we lose people, we've done something wrong. Not always. Sometimes if
yeah,
we lose people for the right reason, we're doing something right. And so how do we create metrics that align with our mission? Now, if you
right,
describe to me that we have metrics that cause people to compete, if kind of creating this survivor island environment in the sales force, then yeah, of course, you're going to have people who are backstabbing, cutting each other off at the knees, and it's going to be really hard. So then how do we think about creating a community, not a bunch of
mm,
individuals, but a community? And how do we
mm,
create a community, a workplace community in which people can contribute to one another, so that if as one succeeds, all succeed, that there's enough to go around if we help one another. And it's this community building orientation that I actually borrow quite a bit from in terms of community organizing, that I start to look at to find guidance in building communities based on assets. And that
mm,
and that leads us to this model of assets-based community development, which comes from something called the Assets-Based Community Development Institute, which is located at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I was fortunate many, many years ago to go to a training program when I was finishing my PhD and working full-time in Detroit, to learn from John McKnight, one of the founders of this, about what assets-based community development means. And this
mm.
book this book, which I still have from 1993, is pretty simple, but pretty profound. Rather than focusing on the deficits that exist in a community and trying to fix those things, we need to start with the assets that exist, the competencies, the capabilities, the skills, the dreams, the goals of people within those communities, and use those as the building block to build the community from within. Most efforts at community development focus on what's missing or what's problematic. Unemployment rates, drug usage, vice crimes, alcoholism, drug use, high school graduation rates or illiteracy or all these negative things, general crime.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to be, we need to fix it with things from the outside. Sounds very much like a consultancy, right?
Like best practices.
Versus, okay, you know what? That's one way of looking at it. Let's look at the community in terms of what strengths it possesses. And let's inventory those strengths, those competencies, capabilities, skill sets, and use that as a foundation to build the community.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I mean, a completely different approach. Once again, makes sense, but it's not how we've been trained. It's not how we've functioned.
Guilty. Because as a sociologist, you can find all kinds of classes at any university that's called social problems. You will find no classes called social, everything's going well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our minds have evolved to focus on threats and problems because those are bigger issues with our survival, right? And so we can take an evolutionary perspective and say, well, yeah, of course, we perceive threats much greater than we perceive lack of threats. People look at Yelp reviews or Amazon reviews and can see 99 out of 100 people who give 5 stars. One person doesn't. We're going to go, I don't know. That one person probably knows something. They're on to something. Everyone else, I'm not going to buy it. Because we're kind of programmed to go in and look at the negative, not the positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I know we're going to talk about the how, like some examples of what an organization can do. I hope that as an attendee that you're listening to this and you're already starting to reflect on how to turn the ship around. And we're not even talking about a team that may be a poor performing team.
No.
Right? I mean, you can have excellence within your organization. The issue is, how do you ensure that excellence is part of your organization and that you're not just lucky, and when you have those high performers leave, then you're kind of stuck with trying to find an external high performer to come in versus knowing that the organization facilitates that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and you've provided some examples, but I just know inherently we're already halfway into the workshop, and we're not going to be able to dig into it really deeply. But when we talked about this topic, I had mentioned to you this is really where a manager, a leader that's listening, they need to kind of go back and have these important conversations with their managers and start really reflecting upon their systems. So the systems that they already have. So what you did was you put together this amazing guide called Exploring High Performance. And it's a guide on uncovering why your people are the best, right? Why the best are the best. And you provide some really, really great methods of how to at least start these conversations and start to uncover the questions to ask yourself as well as your leaders. So I'm going to give folks the opportunity to request this now so that you can really dig deeper and share this with leaders in your organization. So please pull out your cell phone, text Excel, EXCEL, to 411321, and you're going to receive this PDF. It'll ask for your email address if you've never used a Catchword technology, but this PDF is going to come right to your email as an attachment. You can share it with your leadership. Your contact information and even like a link directly to your calendar, Gary, is in here, which is fantastic. That allows people to initiate the conversation within their organization, but tap into your excellence as to how do what do I do with
Right.
what I've learned. But this is a great conversation starter. So if you are for some reason outside of the United States and you are here in this workshop, or you're going to watch the replay, you can text Excel to 1-901-909-741-1321 using texting or WhatsApp. Okay. So that's still accessible to you. So let's talk though a little bit about um, what systematizing excellence might look like within an
Right.
organization and some of your experiences in that area, Gary.
I've been studying work now for, I hate to do the math on this because it makes me feel really old, 25 years, right? I mean, you start to go, has it been that long? It's like, yeah, it's been that long. And I'm an ethnographer of work. And so I study cultures and I study groups and I try to understand what makes them unique as that group or that culture.
Mhm.
And being trained in an area called workplace studies, I've really focused in on workplace practice, what people do in their jobs. And I use a variety of techniques. And most often people will go, well, yeah, but will people really sit and talk to you about what they do? Will they show you what they do? My answer is yes, they will, if you show that you are authentically and genuinely interested in understanding their worlds and you're approaching them with humility and with openness. They will tell you what makes them successful in what it is that they do. Uh,
Mm.
it's more than likely no one has ever asked. And you're not probably going to get it through a survey. Going back to your example of Jane, Jane may not know exactly what she does that makes her so good.
Right.
She might just be doing it. She might have so much time on the job that, if you asked her, she's like, oh, that thing, yeah, that's nothing. And that nothing might be the key to what makes her so good. And so it
Yeah.
really does require a different set of eyes and ears and all other senses to get in touch with what makes these folks so successful at their jobs, because it might be so far beyond their awareness that they wouldn't be able to articulate it. And if you ask
Mhm.
them, and they're probably definitely not going to put it in a survey.
Yeah, so it starts with um a an authentic leadership
Yeah,
intention to
right.
say, hey, we really want to explore this. This is kind of our objective, our mission. But when I think of it's interesting because when I was asking fellow sales representatives about what made them excellent and such, I was on a leadership rotation. So I was only going to be there for 18 months.
Okay.
So I came from a different perspective where if they told me their secrets or whatever, like I was still kind of a little bit of an outsider, but I can imagine how much more powerful it is if somebody completely a third party came in to ask,
Right.
because people love talking about their successes, and they love talking about what they've been doing well, and honestly may love saying, hey, you know what, nobody's ever asked me about this and that. They can have
Right.
these transparent conversations. So when you said a survey is not gonna do it, sure, maybe in the beginning to show that there's an intention, but if you truly want the answer, you're right, it's not going to be your boss or a colleague asking you, what's your secret sauce. It's going to be somebody external. And it also kind of feels like there's a corporate commitment
Right.
to doing something about it if it's somebody external. I'm gonna share this slide that you had mentioned. So let's
Yep.
talk about some of these techniques.
Absolutely. And I've done this both for research and for consulting. And I've researched a lot of different professions and in a lot of different industries, a lot of different skill sets. And every time I've done this, people have been willing to share. And
Mm.
I don't think it's because of my charismatic and winning personality, although I am open to believing that. I think I think it goes more toward the idea that I'm interested. And if you even think about the TV show Dirty Jobs, or, he's really interested in what makes people tick and understanding their world. And as a result, they open up their world and share with them with Mike Rowe, how they do their jobs. And so on the one corner, we have this thing called ethnographic interviewing. It's a particular kind of interviewing where it's very open-ended versus closed-ended. By that, I mean, we don't have a formulaic set of questions that we just kind of roll through in terms of questions and answers. We look for opportunities to engage in what's called probing, where if someone says something, we take the time to go and explore that thing that might be interesting, that might be a portal into a deeper part of their worlds that we need to explore to understand what makes them tick and what makes them successful. It also means that when we do ethnographic interviewing, they're the expert. I'm not the expert. I have a PhD. So what? It doesn't mean I know anything about their world and their job. I know a lot about PhDing. And I know quite a bit about teaching. And I know I know quite a bit about this. It doesn't mean I know anything about their worlds. And it doesn't matter if it's manual labor, knowledge work. There's no such thing as non-knowledge work. All work is knowledge work. And it's the goal is trying to understand through ethnographic interviewing what they're bringing to the table that makes them successful in their role and at their job.
Mm-hmm.
We go for the job shadowing, which I really love, which is what you described, right? On your rotation, following people along to understand what their days and what their lives are like in doing their work. And not just job shadowing within a team or within a part of an organization, but what about across organizations? What about across hierarchies? There's a really great book called Customer Comes Second. And in this one company, the author of the book and the CEO of the company would invite people to follow him around and see what was involved in his job. Because there's a lack of understanding of what each other is doing. Going back to how work gets done is the best kept secret in America or any country. Yeah. People just don't know. I was doing one training program for a very large company and listening to contact center calls after I analyzed them. And I was finding out what people were doing really well that people didn't know about. And I was playing it to the managers and to the C-level executives, and they were just dumbfounded. They're like, oh my God, we had no idea people were doing this. And they felt bad. I'm like, well, why would you know? You're busy doing your thing, right? Yeah. Everyone's busy in their worlds. And so it's how do we surface this? And job shadowing, whether as an external consultant, like I often do as an academic researcher, or as a person within the organization to really tap into, like Undercover Boss, for instance, tap into what it is that people are doing to understand not only the work, but the world in which the work happens, which is a key element.
Mm-hmm.
With me so far?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting when you're bringing up the reality shows, because it allows people to appreciate that more. There is a big difference when you're also genuinely interested.
Right.
So I think there is there's potentially a risk when an organization is just kind of checking off the box and saying, oh, this seems to be an interesting method that we should attempt, right? It seems like it's going to be more powerful if leadership truly stops and thinks and says, this would be fascinating. This would really be interesting, and to display that, because otherwise the exercise may be perceived almost as a probing sort of exercise, right? And any thoughts on that? I mean, have you experienced in your consulting experiences, have you experienced managers just kind of approaching it as like, well, this is an interesting concept, I guess we can try it, or are managers typically kind of thinking, wow, actually, I just never thought about this. This is exciting.
Managers are really excited about it if they don't have to do it, because they're already busy doing a lot of other stuff.
Right.
I mean, I really do. When I teach my class on employee experience, and when I do my consulting work, I have a real concern for middle management, because, people talk about top down and bottom up leadership, but I prefer to think about middle out. And, that's where things happen. If you think about it from a war metaphor, you have the generals in the headquarters and you have the troops on the front line. But what about the lieutenants and the sergeants who are managing and deploying things as things are happening and reacting to the changing circumstances? And if they're already overtaxed and overburdened and under-resourced, then it's not going to work out very well. So I think managers, if they can see and when they see how this can help them in their work, they're very, very welcoming for the idea. If it's here's one more thing you have to do on top of everything else you have to do, then anything is going to be challenging in terms of change. And this is where working with someone like a me, or making the opportunity available for people to do this in replacement of certain responsibilities, not in addition to, is an important strategy.
Right. Yes, it's a major decision strategically for upper management and leadership to determine how they're going to start introducing this into the organization. Well, that's where it's one thing to be aligned with this concept, but it's another thing to actually connect to experts. That's why I think experts are rocket fuel, right? To connect an expert to figure out what's the best approach.
And I will say, going back to the catchword, that's why I put together this manual, this helpful little book that I say book, it's booklet, this because it provides some simple things to get started, right? You can get this process started of accelerating high performance and embracing excellence by some simple techniques and some simple approaches. We're kind of laying out some of them right here, and there's a few more to get through. But in this booklet, there are some actionable, tangible things that you can do that won't take very long, that can kind of dip your toe into that water and be like, okay, I see how this can be really important. And the conversation shifts from we don't have time to do this to we don't have time not to do this, right? We have to be doing this because the loss of opportunity is so great that if we don't take advantage of this, if we don't take advantage of the expertise that our own people have in a more systematized way, we're really going to lose out, and we're going to be spending resources, bringing in external people with, out of the box solutions that don't fit, with best practices that don't work. And we're going to waste resources in that direction when we could be directing resources in this direction.
Right. And the thing is, if you're considering teaching people new techniques, this best practices approach, I mean, that takes more time. You're literally diverting yourself away versus the fastest approach is to look internally and see what you're already doing well and amplify that.
The best way to improve customer experience is to start with employee experience. And the Accelerating High Performance Framework is about improving customer experience through first embracing excellence in your employees. That's the idea. That's the goal. And we think about knowledge sharing, that when we capture this information, when people have strategies, hacks or approaches that make them really successful, is there the opportunity to share that knowledge? Is there the opportunity for them to exchange what they're doing well? And there's a lot of research examples of what that looks like when it works well. I know we don't have time to go into it. Folks can contact me. I'm happy to share some of those examples with you. But when you create an environment, a community-based environment in which knowledge sharing takes place, people will support one another in their work, and the benefits will become more enterprise-wide and much more scalable than they would be if you implemented some best practice training.
In addition to the idea of having that repository of internal best practices, I guess, but so that if that person does leave, you have it.
That too.
You have it retained.
Absolutely. And
hopefully the person doesn't leave because you're changing the employee experience,
or leaves for the right reasons, right? And eventually comes back. That I've talked with numerous clients who will talk about, we've had people leave, but we want to create that relationship so that they come back. Right. And that once they do come back, we benefit from their experience someplace else. And so if they leave for the right reasons, okay. If they leave for the wrong reasons, that's something else. Right. And it gets us into this last thing, which is participatory design. When we're thinking about designing what the outcome looks like, whether it be training programs, whether it be knowledge sharing sessions, whether it be some kind of internal peer-led, quote unquote, excellence facilitation program, we need to build it together. The people who are the intended audiences need to be part of the process. And I'm a strong believer thinking about design frameworks or design thinking to take a participatory design approach. Don Norman, who I mentioned earlier, he shifted from talking about human-centered design into humanity-centered design. I shift that to actually being humane-centered design, adding the E for experience. Design becomes humane when we think about the experiences that people are having. And so having the employees be part of that design process, which I've done with clients, makes for a program that they embrace because they see themselves in it rather than see it imposed on them.
Excellent. Excellent. Wow. I mean, I can imagine the different directions that a program can go in once you actually start customizing it for what that group's excellence is. And it's interesting. I feel like that might be a little scary for some folks, but it's different.
It's funny, right? There is a pride in creativity, and there's a pride in innovation. There's a pride in making something ourselves. This is why I can go to IKEA and buy furniture. But you know what? I saw on TV someone doing a DIY project, and so I want to take a cut at that. And so you go out and buy the router, or as we say in Boston, the router. You go get the router, and you try to do it yourself using a video. And you might get lucky and it might work, or you might mess up a bunch of pieces of wood. What if you could have an expert standing there with you, helping you along the way?
Right.
And so you're doing it yourself, and you're learning. It's what we used to call apprenticeships, right? You're learning on the job, you're doing it yourself, but under the supervision of somebody else. And when I think about the Accelerating High Performance Framework and the role that I play in this and providing the booklet on it, that's what I envision is I want companies to get to a point where they can do it themselves, but initially they might need some guidance to do it. It should be part of the very fabric of the culture.
Yes.
So that it's systematized, it's routinized, it's just what we do. It's no longer a diet, it's just how we eat.
Right. And it's something that everybody truly believes is possible,
right,
as well, versus feeling like, okay, well, we're going to just try this for a couple of months. If they're empowered to appreciate some of these techniques and incorporate it into how they do it, then they become more confident that this is something that is sustainable for them as well.
Absolutely. Just really quick, another example. As a professor, we're trained to mark papers, and usually we mark what's wrong, what people didn't get correct, what they missed on an answer. We're not trained to mark what they did well. I mean, so this idea of the negative, right? The cult of the negative, of pointing out errors. As parents, don't touch the stove. Don't do this. Don't do that. You should have done this versus, oh, that was great what you did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pervasive, right? In a weird, insidious kind of way. And so the idea of refocusing on assets and what we're doing well is not to ignore what we are doing wrong, but it's to acknowledge what we are successful at and use that as a starting point, a strengths builder, working on our strengths first before diving into what needs to be improved.
Now, I mean, at this point, I just think of, well, what do we have to lose, right? Yeah. When if we don't change, if an organization feels like they're doing well already, or they want to improve, but they want to go and just consider the traditional methods of external best practices, et cetera. What is the lost opportunity in not considering this methodology?
There's quite a bit to lose, actually. I mean, if you think about what could we lose? Well, we think about the current workplace, the current work environment. We think about, the idea of quiet quitting or malicious compliance. We think about the loss of employee engagement. Here's an example from a poster on a Reddit thread called Malicious Compliance, Epic Sausage 69. So thank you, Epic Sausage, for... Not my name, but we're going to get full attribution. I'm an academic, so we believe in citation, citing a source. That's all I'm doing, folks. So this poster, onto Reddit, provided this thread of only do what is in my job title, question mark. Fine. Good luck paying employees. And it was a long Twitter thread, or I said Reddit thread, where the bottom line, the too long, don't read, was I was doing work outside my job title. Supervisor gets mad and tells me no, not to do work outside my job title. I stop and company is unable to pay employees for 2 weeks. Turns out that this worker was the primary person who knew how the enterprise system worked. And when there was a problem in the enterprise system, they could have called the consultant for the enterprise company, and that would have taken time and cost money to pay the consultant, or this worker could have done it. And the worker was just doing it because in his job function, he got access to the enterprise system and was a quick learner at it, and turns out could figure it out in a relatively short period of time. And so people would contact him and say, can you fix this? And he'd be like, yeah, sure, get it taken care of. Then his supervisor got angry about something and told him, under no circumstances can you do that anymore. You can only do what's in your job description. And so as a result of that, when the entire payroll system went down, and the factory, not the factory, but the warehouse workers started walking out the door because they weren't getting paid, he's like, hey, I was told I couldn't do anything outside my job description. So he told the vice president, I was told by my manager not to do it, so I'm not going to do it. And here is what my manager said in writing. The vice president finally caves in and gives me promotion to do said work outside my job title along with a raise. Nice. So this person was perfectly willing to continue to support the enterprise system under the old title and under the old salary, but was told, don't do what's outside of your job title. Only do what you're paid to do. And when we think about quiet quitting, malicious compliance, work to rule, which is what it was known as before, if you ask your people to only do what's in their job title, good luck. Because usually that's how work stops. That's how work stops. And so we really do need to get to understanding what people do. We can also think about not having this understanding of what makes the best people the best. How long does it take your new hires to ramp up in their job roles? How are we training them? Are we training them in a way that lets them in on these hacks, these skills, the tacit knowledge that makes the company function? Or are we just training them on some kind of formalized thing that doesn't capture that knowledge?
That's really interesting in thinking about inherently, we would say, oh, well, we have a newbie, it's going to take them 6 months, 9 months, a year to really be performing the way, we'd like for them to perform. And we don't think, well, maybe there's something you could do about that. And maybe there's something within your structure, or instead of just kind of inherently thinking, oh, well, that's just part of being a newbie. Like, what can we do to actually accelerate and get them to high performance faster?
I was working with a client in particular around this point, and we created a new training program for their employees based upon their already present, what we would say academically, endogenous best practices, the skills that they already possessed. And I did that from analyzing their calls with their contact center calls with customers, and noticing what they were really doing well. And all of the evaluation frameworks they had in the organization was all around what was going wrong. And if that's what their managers were tasked with looking at, that's what they saw. It's called selective perception. If I tell you what to look for, that's what you'll see. And so by shifting the metrics, the evaluation framework from just the negative to the positive, and from identifying skills that people were already showing in the calls that were not being recognized, and by putting that all together in a new training program and then training their trainers on it, we created a new framework for new hires and existing hires to accelerate their high performance. And the employees finally felt heard, right? They finally felt heard. They felt like someone was listening to them. And one of the greatest disengagers of employees is ignoring the gifts that they bring to the workplace. And we need to accept those gifts, because no one likes it when a gift that we give is not appreciated, no matter what that gift is. It could be, I have a collection of videos from YouTube of marriage proposals gone wrong.
Oh no.
Oh, yes. And I don't know
Oh,
why anybody
people.
would propose in public, but okay. When I proposed, it was in the woods with nobody around.
You were ready.
Yeah, I was like, if this doesn't go right, no one's gonna see it. And so, you have people giving proposals and people going, nah. And it's horrible, right? It's horrible. You can think back to, anybody online has kids, and you take a long time to think about what are the gifts you're going to give, and you look for the deals, and you go out and you brave the crowds, and you shop, and you wrap it carefully, and you place it under the tree, and Santa shows up, and then the kids go and rip through the gifts, and then the kids look at you and go, "Is that it? That's
Yeah.
all? Oh, I really wanted that other thing." You're like,
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
oh my, that's just the deflation that takes place. And so, when we give a gift, we look for the reaction.
Yeah,
Imagine being your employees and they bring this gift and there's no reaction. And that's what we
that's true.
have very often in the workplace.
That is true. Yeah. So that's where, having a commitment, making sure it's a very structured approach of how
Yeah.
this is being rolled out. Probably ensuring that there's sufficient communication around the progress, and I'm just kind of already thinking about how to ensure and communicate that this is important and that the intention truly is to adopt this new method.
Right.
And it's an amazing um method of employee retention,
Absolutely.
right? Because people want to stick around to see
Yeah.
this.
And you build community, and it works virtually as well as co-located.
Yeah.
So we think about building virtual workplace communities. We can dig into these same strategies, techniques, skill sets that occur in a distributed environment as a co-located environment. And it's really about starting with people, right? I'm a sociologist. As I said before, it's a science of belonging and connection. And so I got into sociology because I was very interested and I knew the importance of connection and belonging. And how do we create environments in which people feel like they can connect with one another and belong? And so
Mhm.
I've distilled my 25+ years and counting into this accelerated high performance framework to create workplaces of connection and belonging, to create workplace communities, and to facilitate excellence in a way that people feel like they're contributing to the outcome.
Yeah. And it's interesting, but in my mind, it keeps on repeating. This isn't fluffy.
No.
This isn't kumbaya. Oh, wouldn't it be nice? As a business owner of 18 years, I think about the importance of retention.
Hmm.
I think of what's really lost when you lose your great people or even your medium people. I mean, just there's huge opportunity in truly putting a focus on trying to truly understand what creates excellence within the organization. And I'm happy that you're putting a focus on this, and I hope that our attendees can really reflect on what's going on in their organizations, understand that um that there are changes that are necessary. Good enough is no longer good enough.
It's not.
Folks leave jobs very, very easily, for different reasons. But if there is a strong sense of belonging and feeling of being heard, and also feeling that I think this concept of accelerating high performance for everyone, that means that your organization is actually looking to help you
Right.
become a high performer. It's not like they're watching to see if you're a high performer.
Right. Let me make you successful. When we think about when I teach employee experience, I tell students and I tell clients that employee engagement is about optimizing the employee for the purposes of the company.
Mhm.
And so how do we provide things within the workplace that will optimize the employee's work to make the company more productive? employee experience is about optimizing the company for the purposes of the employee. And so how do we make the organization in such a way that our people become more successful? Hopefully, ideally, they are more successful with us over the long term. But even if they move someplace else, they're going to remember that it was us who put them in the place to succeed. And success is better for everybody. And so if we want to appreciate and accelerate, then we need to first identify what it is that people are doing well. And that's where this starts.
Absolutely. So I encourage you to really take this education into action. And as an attendee, and if you have not already requested for this guide, for this material, then please text Excel to 411321. You'll receive Exploring High Performance, this guide on uncovering why your people are the best, why the best are the best. And most importantly, to really start thinking about how this piece is not only an opportunity for you to sit with the content a little bit, but to actually spark some conversation within the organization. And of course, I asked you to join us because I feel that you would be a great resource. So I will say, in that email and an attachment, there are opportunities for you to connect with Dr. Gary David. And I think that I think we need to start exploring these new methods. So I appreciate that you joined us today. Once again, Dr. Gary David, professor of sociology and experience design. Now you know what experience design is, hopefully,
and
my listeners.
technology.
And yes, exactly. And I appreciate you sharing this, and hopefully we've inspired people to start making some changes or consider some changes.
It was great being here. Thanks so much for the time.